money just isn't stretching as far as it used to. Affording essentials is becoming difficult for many and impossible for some.
Yeah, I definitely have felt the crunch past 2 months, and yeah, it's not nice. It's not. I've had to get a second job, actually looking for a third job also.
And as people tighten their belts, the cost of living squeeze is impacting businesses too.
We're not surviving at all, just working for nothing, you know. People can't afford anymore. Things gone up too much, everything gone double price. People think maybe we are doing, you know, but it's a hard time, really hard.
In the past year, gas prices in the UK have increased by 95.5%. Electricity is up 53.5%, and the cost of food has jumped nearly 7%. Families are also feeling the pinch here at the petrol pump. Fuel prices hit an all-time high this week. This car used to cost $75 to fill up. Today, it was $100. The rapid rise in inflation is partly being driven by disrupted supply chains caused by Brexit and the pandemic. But the war in Ukraine is also a major contributor.
So we're talking about a real increase in costs for energy. And we've had huge amount of concern about food and food prices going up, shortages already appearing. The Ukraine and Russia were major exporters of wheat, for example. Also, of course, fertilizers, which have gone up in price very significantly. That is affecting willingness of anyone to plant things for next year as well. So we're talking about the type of food crisis which is going to last for some time.
The Bank of England expects inflation to peak at 10% later this year. It's hinted it will continue to lift interest rates in an attempt to stem the rise, but its governor is predicting apocalyptic global food prices. And he admits he feels helpless when it comes to stopping the runaway costs, which are already causing so many people so much pain. Sarah Morice, TRT World, London.
For more on this, let's bring in economist Vicky Pryce in London. She's a board member at the Centre for Economics and Business Research. Good to have you back with us, Vicky. Can we look deeper into the UK situation? As we heard there, inflation soared to 9%, but when you look at the average pay rise, excluding bonuses in March, that came in at just 4.2%, which means essentially a fall in wages in real terms. Explain to us, what more should the government be doing in order to not only bring costs down, but to help support those who really need the money?
It's interesting about wages, and you're quite right to point at that. One big element of the areas where wages are just not rising anything like as rapidly as inflation, so therefore there's a real costs that people are bearing every day, is the public sector. So the public sector is increasing wages, very, very slowly. There had been a moratorium on increasing wages anyway. So what you're seeing is that there is an increasing gap between the private sector and public sector wages, which is a big issue given that there are something like 5.5 million people working in the public sector in the UK. So that's number one. The second thing is what happens for those at the lower end of the pay scale, particularly those who rely on benefits. And one of the things that the government does is they upgrade benefits in line with inflation every year. Unfortunately, the figure that they used to upgrade benefits was the inflation that was in operation last September. So benefits have only gone up by 3.1%. And of course, all these people are suffering because, of course, inflation now is considerably higher. And benefits only went up in April. And in April, of course, we already had much higher inflation than was the case just 6 months ago. So that's a big, big issue. What the government can do, of course, is it can raise those benefits. It is going to be costly. It can do that. It can also, as it has done, support people at the lower end, again, of the pay scale with, extra subsidies in terms of the energy costs. But of course, he hasn't done anything directly about food bills, which is one of the things that we're talking about today, given that a very large percentage of anything that people have, whether it's incomes or benefits or actual work money that they receive if they are at work, but if they are at the lower end of the pay scale, the majority of what they have goes to food and to heating, or maybe, although we don't have that much of that in the UK, air conditioning bills.
That's right. Now, when you look at the first line of defence around the world, we're seeing central banks raise interest rates, and indeed the Bank of England is doing the same. And we're expecting the central bank in the UK to raise interest rates yet again next month to possibly around 1.25%. But how effective is making borrowing costs higher in terms of reducing inflation, in your view?
Well, the result of higher interest rates is going to be extra pain for households, those who have mortgages, and possibly also for businesses. Remembering, though, that interest rates where they are now are still very negative in real terms. So the impact will be muted because of that. But of course, that depends on whoever has got a mortgage also receiving a reasonable pay rise. The reality is that higher interest rates will do very little in the short term to the inflationary environment we have, because of course most of that inflation is caused by higher energy prices, which are global, and also higher food prices, which we have been hearing are also global, and caused, of course, particularly recently by the war in Ukraine. So it's not going to have any serious impact for the short term, but of course it does affect inflationary expectations perhaps. But even the governor of the Bank of England has admitted that food prices are rising so fast, and actually at the end of the day it's going to be a slowdown in the economy that's going to bring inflation down rather than higher interest rates.
It is interesting right now to see that the UK has the highest inflation rate in all of the G7 group of economies. When you look at France, for example, prices there are rising by half as much as they are in the UK. Why do you think we're seeing such a difference in the rising costs of living in the UK compared with its peers?
Well, in France, of course, because the way in which this electricity system works, everything or most of it mostly is under the control of the company called EDF, which is Électricité de France, which is basically directed by the government. So they have asked it to keep prices very low. So the increase in electricity prices coming through to households in France is only 4%. We've just had a 54% increase in household energy bills in April. So you can see the difference there. So that's one reason. The second reason is we've had Brexit, of course. Supply chain issues have been worse here than perhaps they've been in other places since we opened up. So that has brought about a sort of underlying high inflation rate anyway. So you add all that, plus the fact that government has not contributed to reducing the cost of living. As I was suggesting earlier, other countries have already done cuts in VAT. They have given sort of reductions to people in terms of the subsidies they have to pay themselves for renewable energy in their household bills. So those bills are also going down. The result of that is, of course, that if you measure inflation, it tends to be lower than is the case in the UK. How sustainable it is in places like France, it's questionable, but other countries have taken the decision to really keep a lid on prices a lot more than is the case in the UK. And of course, that is reflected in a higher inflation rate here.
Okay, Vicky Pryce, we'll have to leave it there, but really good to get your analysis as always. Thank you for that.
Thank you.